Hey, Aubrey, how's it going?
I'm great. How are you, Lindsay?
Good. I have a question for you today. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So, have you had any problems that you recently had to figure out? Anything?
Ooh, yes. We had the pool light went out on our pool and we love to be able to swim at night, but it's so dark if it's not lit from below. And we got an estimate to fix it and it was going to be so expensive that we decided to
Mm.
try to do it on our own. We had to like dig a trench and
Oh
run the
my gosh.
electricity really far. And it's hot here in
Sounds
the Arizona
dangerous.
summer. It was so much work and so terrible that at the end we're like, we definitely probably should have hired someone
Did
to
you
do
did
that.
you get it working? Did
We
you figure it
did.
out?
We did get it working, but it took so much time. It was such a pain that we kind of regretted doing it
Oh my
ourselves.
gosh, that's
But we were able
insane.
to do it. We did figure it out. At first, we had like run the electricity and then it wasn't working. And it took a while to figure out what was wrong. Luckily, my husband's pretty handy. He was able
Good.
to figure out because I'm no electrician. I don't know about you, Lindsay.
No, no, my brother would be able to do that, but I definitely do not know how to deal with electricity for sure.
It takes a
No.
certain skill set, right? For sure.
Yeah,
I'm not luckily I had some help there to figure that out, but it was a
good.
big process. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. Working on the house. I like it.
Hmm.
Guys, we're going to get into today's episode now, but don't forget that if you love All Ears English, a great way to listen is inside the iOS or Android app. And Aubrey, every week you choose our power vocab words, right?
Yes, exactly right. I choose the words that are less common, that are very high level. Makes it so easy for you to click on it, see the definition, an example sentence, and add it to your personal power vocabulary list. So it's really the
Yes.
best way to listen to the All Ears English podcast episodes. So you can check it
Yeah.
out at allearsenglish.com/app, APP.
Yes.
And it's available now for iOS and Android, which is we're very proud of
Yes.
that.
We love that, we love that. So, today's episode starts with a question from one of our amazing listeners who I actually got to meet in San Francisco. I love when
That's
we get to
so
meet our
awesome.
listeners, and this listener is our listener, Jing. Should I go ahead and read the question?
Yes, this is related to that, question you asked me about having to figure something out, so this is gonna
Yes.
be really good. Let's hear it.
If we're tying it back to that question at the top of the episode. So here we go. Hi,
Mhm.
Lindsay. I hope all is well with you and your team. I can't believe it's been more than 5 years since we last met at the San Francisco airport in December of 2017.
That is so awesome.
It was a long time
Love it.
ago. Wow. Yes. Okay. The podcast has become even more amazing since then. Keep up the good work. That's so good. Shout out to Jing. And so cool to meet our listeners in person. We love it.
Yes.
All right. I have a quick grammar question that I'd love to hear your team talk about on the podcast. In the statement, I figured out what all that noise coming from the basement is should from the basement is be from the basement was because the verb for the main sentence figure is in its past tense. I think I've seen both. Am I correct or am I hallucinating? If
Mhm.
people do use both, then when to use is and when to use was. I'd greatly appreciate it if your team could talk about this grammar rule. It's widely used in daily conversations. And I know that Jing is living or was at that time living in San Francisco. So, really working in English, living and
Mhm.
working in English, right?
Yeah, and she's not wrong. We use this all the time in native conversations, both at
Yes.
work and in our daily lives. So I'm excited to dive into this because the grammar can be a little tricky. I can see exactly why Jing was confused here. You see figured in the past tense. So you would think the verb to be would be was.
Yes.
So definitely would be good to have this question in the transcripts. I hope
Yeah.
you guys are following along in the app because this is one of
Yes.
those where if you're following along the transcripts, it's like, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah, and I think this is also one that native speakers might get confused about too. If they
Oh,
stop
yeah.
and think about what they're saying, they might not be able to explain. So we've done a little
Yeah.
research today to
Hmm.
explain these to you. So what do we have to know first to answer
Yeah.
Jing's question?
So, first is you can use this with both present or past, depending on the meaning of your sentence. We'll break down the grammar for you, give some example sentences so you can use this and be familiar with how this grammar should work.
Okay, cool. So in the first case, what do we need to know?
Yeah.
So
So, first you have figured out, just the same,
mhm,
right? I figured out, and then it's followed by a verb in the present tense. The
mhm,
difference is the meaning of this sentence is that something is still happening. So, give us an
okay.
example,
Yeah,
Lindsay.
let's this
Well, the
episode is
example
going to
from
be
the, email or yeah,
yeah. Yeah, this episode is gonna be all about examples, right?
for
All about
sure.
examples. So just, guys, if don't get overwhelmed with the grammar, just listen in today. You can listen to this episode multiple times too. So here's the example. I figured out what the noise in the basement is. That means that the noise is still coming from the basement, right? That's the key.
Exactly, right? Yes, this is the example Jean gave us, right? If I see this sentence, I figured out what the noise in the basement is. You see figured in the past tense.
Yeah.
The noise, because the noise is still coming from the basement, we have the verb to be here in the present tense is. You have the
Yes.
subject, the basement, and then the present tense verb is.
Yeah, so we're really simplifying it for you guys here. It depends on, is the thing still happening? So here's another example. Aubrey, you want to give the second example?
Yeah, just they figured out what the problem is. So a little more
Mhm.
general here. We're just saying whatever the problem is, it's still happening. It still exists. It has not been solved. So we use that is in the present tense.
I love it. So that's when the thing is still happening. So that's really straightforward. Obviously, figured out happened in the past. That's done, but the problem still
Mhm.
exists.
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. And so that's where, if you're like diagramming a sentence, like picking apart the sentence, this is where you'll get tripped up. If you just see that figured out in the past and think, okay, all of the verbs have to be in past tense. But if you really dive into the sentence and what's happening here, you see that figure out and then is at the end of the sentence are separate verbs, right?
Yeah.
So
Yes.
for this to be verb is, the subject is the noise or the problem, and so
Mhm.
then the verb is to be, and whether that's in past or present is all about, is this problem still happening or not?
I love that. I love that. Guys, it's all about context, right? Don't just
Yes.
take language in isolation, especially grammar.
Mhm.
Take it in context. So, the second situation, let's talk about what happens when the verb is in the past tense, like the thing is done, right?
Exactly. Right. So figured out will be the same. It's still,
Yeah.
I figured out. And then we have the verb in the past tense. So we could have that exact same sentence that Jing shared. It would be, I figured out what the noise in the basement was. And you
Was.
see the
Yeah.
difference in the context changes. This noise is no longer happening. Right.
Right. Like, for example, just to bring this into real life, maybe last night I heard some banging in the basement. Oh, God forbid, right? I
Right.
heard some banging in the basement, and now it's the next morning. It's no longer there. So I went downstairs and I figured out that the noise was the laundry machine or something. Right.
Yes, exactly, right? The noise is no longer happening, so you're
Hmm.
using that verb in the past tense. Oh, I figured
Yes.
out what the noise in the basement was. Luckily, it's no longer happening.
Yes. Okay. And then another example, they figured out what the problem was. Problem is now resolved, but they figured out what it was when it existed. Right, Aubrey?
Exactly. So you can see you have the option of either having is or was. It all depends on the meaning you want to share. Does the problem still exist? Then you'll say, "Oh, figured out what the problem is. It still exists. It's still happening."
Yes.
If it's finished, if it's resolved, then you'll say, "Okay, they figured out what the problem was. Luckily, it's no longer a problem."
I love that. That is so clear. And it's pretty simple when you think about it, right? Think about, does this thing exist anymore or is it done? Right? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. What else? What are some other verbs that make sense here in this kind of situation with
Right?
past tense or
Because
present? Yeah.
when we say I figured out, right, it means the same as I discovered or
Yeah.
I realized, and the same grammar works for these verbs. You can replace these verbs in all of those example sentences. You could say,
Okay.
we discovered what the issue is, if the issue still exists, or we discovered what the issue was, if the issue has been resolved.
Yeah, and why, let's come back to connection because our, our
Mhm.
motto, our value here on the podcast is connection, not perfection. We believe that's the most important thing when it comes to learning a language. So why is this a great phrase for connection,
Yes,
Aubrey?
it really is because when we're getting deeper with relationships, we often will share discoveries we've made about ourselves and we'll use this phrase figured out. For example, I might say, I've figured out what my struggle is. I need to get more organized. And all the other
Interesting.
ways I can think to say that don't feel nearly as connected, right? If I say, like, okay, I know what my problem is. I need to get more, right? This I figured
Right.
out feels so much more friendly.
Right. Or the other words might be too conceptual, like I analyzed, or like I don't know. Yeah, I like that figured out. I like how that works right there. So, Aubrey, should we go into a role play? What do you think? Oh, hello,
Oh,
hello. Oh, are you there?
can
Oh,
you
yeah. You know what? Your mic is muting itself. This happened with Michelle this
Weird.
morning.
Oh.
I think there's something going on with StreamYard because Michelle and I had this issue this
Can you
morning.
hear me now? Oh,
Yeah,
weird.
I can hear you. I'm making a note here,
Oh, okay.
where Gaspar will have to edit out. Edit
Yeah,
out
yeah.
around 10 minutes. Let's keep going, and then
Okay.
maybe for the next one, we'll
Should be
flip
easy
over to
to
Zoom.
jump yeah, to remove right before the role play. Bummer, weird. I
Yeah,
wonder
that's
why it's
super
doing
weird.
that.
Okay, here we go. So, Aubrey, should we go ahead and do a role play for our listeners now?
Yes, let's do it. This one is a little outside of the box, Lindsay. In this role play, you and I are mechanics working on a car. Switch it up a little bit.
Cool. I love that idea.
Nice.
Do something different, not staring at a computer screen all day, right?
Yes, I would love
Okay.
to be able to
I'm gonna
fix my own car and not have to pay a mechanic. Be
That'd be
amazing.
amazing.
Okay,
Here
I'll
we go.
start us out.
Okay.
I figured out what the problem with the AC is.
Oh, good. I think I figured out what the issue with the fan was too. I tightened it and it's working great now.
Perfect. This was a really tough job. I think I've figured out what my problem is. I don't want to be an auto mechanic.
Yeah.
That's one of those where I think in theory, oh, it'd be amazing to be able to do this myself, and then it's just like the fixing this light on our pool. It's
Yeah.
so difficult and so much work that I'm like, "Okay, every penny I pay the auto mechanic is worth it. They're earning it."
And physical work too, hard
Yes.
physical work.
Mm.
Yeah, it
Very
seems glamorous,
laborious.
but not so much. Yeah, hard. Yeah, for sure. So here's some examples. Aubrey, first you said I figured out what the problem with the AC is because it still exists, right?
Exactly. I haven't fixed it. I haven't resolved it. I've figured out what the problem is, and I'm going to use present tense and say is because it's still a problem.
Okay. And then what did I say?
And you used the past tense because you said, I think I figured out what the issue with the fan was. I tightened it and it's working now. So you're
Nice.
using past tense there because you were able to resolve the issue.
Right. And the next one is an issue you currently have, right? I think I figured out what my problem is. I don't want to be an auto mechanic, but you currently are an auto mechanic and this is your problem. It's not
Yeah.
was my problem, right? Yeah.
Right, and this is where we're showing this the way it's so good for connecting, where you
Yeah.
can talk about something you've discovered about yourself in this way. "Okay, I figured out what my problem is," or "I figured out what my goal is." This is a
Yeah.
great phrase for sharing something personal.
Yeah, and I think just on a human level, I think when you are able to share things that you've already discovered about yourself, you can have higher quality friends, like attract higher quality people in your life. People that are actually somewhat reflective and introspective on their own lives, right?
Absolutely, you can say, "I've figured out the type of people that I wanna be surrounded by." Right? Absolutely.
Exactly. I love it. So good. What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, so this can be tricky. Anytime there are multiple subjects or verbs in a sentence, you cannot rely on just making them all match, right? You have to think about the meaning of the sentence, think about the context. Today's tips will help you be able to use figured out, not only, when you're talking about things you've discovered, but also discoveries you make about yourself.
Yes, and special thank you to our listener, Jing, for asking this question and for being such a long time listener. How amazing is that?
Yes,
Fantastic.
I
Yeah.
love it. Shout out to
All right.
Jing. I love that you guys met up at the airport. That is so awesome.
It was really cool. All right, Aubrey, I'll see you on the next episode. Have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye.